I was studying a piece of Talmud with the teens in our Hochberg Academy recently, and I wanted to share a little about that text. It's a fascinating piece that's based on the mitzvah in Deuteronomy chapter 22 that says, if a bird's nest happens before you on the way, in a tree or on the ground with any fledglings or eggs, and if the mother bird is resting on the fledglings or upon the eggs, you have to shoo away the mother bird, you send her away, and then the young you can take for yourself. And that seems pretty clear. It's actually a really interesting mitzvah. There's a book called A Year of Living Biblically by, I think it's J.J. Jacobs or A.J. Jacobs, where he visits a place where ultra-Orthodox Jews are doing this deliberately. They have a nest set up, and a bird has come and laid her eggs, and so they're able to fulfill this mitzvah, which most of us normally aren't able to fulfill because we may not have eggs or nests right near our homes. And if we do, we tend to leave them and get our eggs from the supermarket instead and tend to let nature take its course. But of course, back then, they didn't have readily available eggs like that, and so it was important for them to be able to take eggs, but do so appropriately. So that seems like a totally fair, innocuous Torah verse. If you come across a nest in a tree or on the ground, and you want to take the eggs, here's what you have to do. And then Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, if one finds a nest in the sea, then one is obligated to shoo away the mother bird. And then the passage continues, the passage of Talmud continues, says, if that's so, what about a nest in the sky? What do you do then? And then finally, the residents of Papunya say to Rav Matana, what if you find the nest on a head of a person? This sounds bizarre, and perhaps it is deliberately. It's really important for us to understand that Judaism can be funny. There are many examples in Torah, for example, where we clearly see biblical humor. It's not humor in the way that we might understand it traditionally, in the way that we might tell a joke, but particularly there are jokes based on place names in Torah. Jacob comes out of his mother holding his brother's heel, his ekev. That's why he's called Jacob, Yaakov. Yaakov holds the ekev. That didn't actually happen. It's impossible for that to happen physically, but it did happen in Torah because it's setting up humor. And humor around Jacob's name is actually really important. For example, later on, when he crosses the river, as he's preparing to meet Esau, he's left by himself. What's the river called? It's called the Yabok River. It's an anagram of his name. And so there's an inversion of Jacob, which then his name is changed entirely, and he's renamed Yisrael because he's struggled with God. And so this may not be, hold your belly roaring laughter humor, but there is humor in Judaism. That's one of many examples. And so in Talmud, similarly, sometimes there are excerpts which are clearly meant to be humorous. But that doesn't mean that the humor doesn't have a serious point. And very often, in fact, you can find comedies, comedy movies, comedy plays and books that are making us laugh, but actually getting to a very important, serious point. And here, I think, is a really good example of this. Because most of the time, you will find a nest on the ground or in a tree. But perhaps you might find a nest elsewhere. And the serious point here is that the rabbis want to make sure they're doing the right thing. Torah says to us, Ma Adonai lehecha she'el me'imach. What does the eternal your God ask of you? What does God want of you in this moment? Let's say you came across a bird's nest that wasn't in a tree or on the ground. Then what do? What does God ask of you in that moment? And so the rabbis are exploring the other possibilities. And they might sound farcical. The first one, not so much. Finding a nest at sea. That's possible. It's possible that a nest was on a cliff and fell off the cliff and is floating nearby. It's possible that there was a river, that there was a nest by a river, and the river swirled and took the nest out to sea. This kind of thing is possible. What about a nest in the sky? Well, that's where it's getting a little more challenging. Perhaps it's a nest that a bird had picked up and had dropped, and you just happened to be getting it at that point. Now, of course, the question is, how would you possibly be grabbing eggs from a nest that's falling? That's not really the point. Talmud deals in hypotheticals, not always in practical questions. And there are those who do believe the opposite, that all of these are very practical examples. But as far as I understand it, it's trying to explore all the possibilities. So the nest on someone's head, it's possible. It's possible that there was a nest that grew on someone's head. It's possible that someone just allowed a nest to be put on their head. It's possible that someone considered it to be fashion. That's not really actually the point. The point is a fear of the rabbis that we might do the wrong thing in a certain situation. And so trying to work out what do we do in that circumstance. And that, I think, is really important for Reformed Jews. Because what we do is we tend to look at texts and say, yes, and how does that apply to us today? Because today is a different situation. Today isn't just on the ground or in a tree. Today is something different. So we need to ask ourselves the same question. Ma Adonai Elohecha el me'imach. What does the eternal your God ask of you now, today, in this different situation that isn't spelled out in Torah, which is a book of thousands of years old? And there is timeless wisdom in Torah. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha ani Adonai. Love your neighbor as yourself, or show love to your neighbor as yourself, for I am the eternal your God. Of course, that's timeless, but there are other aspects of Torah that seem very much time-bound, or very much limited, because Torah didn't imagine that humanity could progress in another way. And so there are those who believe that there was an oral law given with the written law. But even that oral law is limited in its knowledge because of when it was put down, when it was written onto paper. And so what we have is a journey, an exploring. And it could be seen as fear, it could be seen as concern, or it could be seen as utter dedication. And that's what I really prefer. What does God want of me now? And so we look in the sources, we look in the traditional sources, we look in Torah, we look in Mishnah, we look in Talmud, we look in codes, and then we have to ask more questions. But what if? And that's a really Jewish thing to do. It's a really Jewish question. But what if? And then we can explore it. And we explore it based on hermeneutical principles of interpretation that we all try to agree on in a community. We try to say, if we take a text, we believe the text, and we try to work out what it's trying to say. Is it only talking about in this one particular instance? Is it talking about a larger instance? And what's wonderful about this, and wonderful about the Talmudic method in particular, is it's inviting us to ask questions. But what if is the key question. And so my hope is to bring Talmud more to our community, more to exploring a different way of thinking. Not just, what does the text say? Okay. But what does the text say? But what if? And that, I think, is a really powerful, important reform question. So keep an ear out, because my hope is to be sharing something very soon with you about Talmud in our community. I hope you will join us for this evening and for tomorrow for our Kabbalat Shabbat service and for our Torah study, which looks at the serpent staff and what's going on there with the snake battle, and then, of course, our Shacharit service as well. I hope to see you then, and I wish you Shabbat Shalom.